Hi, welcome to the Meeting of Minds podcast. I'm Philippa Robinson. Today's episode is going to be about what some people have told me is quite a tricky subject. So today I'm going to talk about how I ended up losing contact really with my mother, and what it was like being estranged from her and from a lot of my family for quite some time. And I grew up as with a mother who was an alcoholic, so I am the child of an alcoholic. And if you are the child of an alcoholic like me, and you are looking for some support, can I please just let you know, in case you don't already know, about a charity called NACOA. That's NACOA, which stands for the National Association for the Children of Alcoholics. They have a website, and on there you will find people's stories about them growing up with alcoholic parents, and you will find lots of resources that you will find useful. Episode 77 I recorded with the wonderful Martin, who is a COA too, a child of an alcoholic, and he found it really useful. He found the information that NACOA have on their website really helpful, really useful. He's a lot younger than me. NACOA weren't around when I was growing up anyway. And I've only recently discovered NACOA. But, if you are the child of an alcoholic, I urge you to go to their website and look at their resources if you would like some support. So, so the reason I ended up estranged from my mother is because she was an alcoholic. Growing up, my mum always liked to drink. My mum split up from my father when I was about 6. He told me, so I didn't see my dad for various reasons for 20 years, but when I found him age 30, he did say to me that she didn't really drink much when they were together. Now, I don't know what not much means, really. My mum and my dad are no longer here. But I think she always liked to drink. Her mother was an alcoholic. Her father liked to drink too. A lot of occasions would centre around alcohol. As a child, I remember being at my grandfather's house, and the drinks cabinet would be opened, the good glasses would come out, and they would be filled with, whatever the drink of choice was. And in those days, when I was growing up in the 70s, people had a few drinks and drove home. So, alcohol was very free and easy, really. And so when it became a problem for my mum, I don't know. I now know how much she drank to numb her pain. And that pain would have been with her for all the time I was alive. She had me when she was 21, and she was an unhappy 21-year-old. So, I suspect there was always an element of drinking to numb her pain, which then is really a problem. But of course, society really sees drinking as something that's expected, that is, what do you mean you don't drink? Just have one, and, all of those. And we drink to celebrate, we drink to commiserate. So drinking is sort of really not just accepted, an expected part of our culture, really, until that drinking becomes out of hand, becomes a problem. And then the person who has a drink problem finds themselves shunned. And, there's not a huge amount of help available. Almost like, well, you got yourself into this situation, so you're kind of on your own. And there is not much help available for the family members who suffer along with the person with the drink problem. there just isn't much help. Anyway, so I think my mum always drank, but it didn't really become an obvious problem, I don't think, until my early teens. Although I say that, she's, always, oh God, I can't believe she used to say this, but she'd say things like, oh, all this nonsense about not drinking while you're pregnant. I drank 3-4 pregnancies and there's nothing wrong with my kids. And, there is real evidence that children who are born to alcoholic mothers, so mothers who drank during their pregnancy, are more likely to become alcoholics themselves. It's just, part of what we absorb. I mean, almost literally through the placenta, but it's that dependency that we are very highly likely to have a sugar dependency, which comes from the alcohol, and we are more likely to be alcoholics, unfortunately. But back to my mother, I say that she didn't really have a massive problem until my teens. And I think what I mean by that is that I don't think I'd noticed that the extent to which she drank, and actually noticed how much of a problem it was until my early teens. By the time I was 13, when I was 13, she had her final child. So there's 13 years between me, the oldest, and the youngest. And she had these 4 children and was struggling, really. And I think that's when the drink really kicked in. Her first marriage to my father had failed. She had 4 kids. She had a husband who wasn't around much. And I think she didn't have much of a life, really. She didn't have anything really away from the family and children, apart from she had a horse. And I'd come home from school and she'd go off and ride her horse, so I'd have to look after all the kids. So I grew up not only with sometimes physically absent, but an emotionally absent mother. And I grew up looking after my much younger brothers. And by the time I left home at 18, I could not wait to get away. I'd finished my A-levels and I couldn't wait to get away. And I found the world quite a scary place, actually, because I didn't learn skills that I may well have learned from more emotionally present parents, but that's the way it was. And I would go home in the holidays from university and would find that my mother had moved things around, especially in the kitchen cupboards. She loved to move things around in the kitchen cupboards. And when I was then opening all the cupboards looking for things, she'd say things like, ha, there you go, that's what happens when you go away. Life moves on without you. Thanks, Mum. And so I never felt particularly welcome. She always said there's always a home here for you, but it was very hard to feel that was the case when I felt like I was being punished in some way for having had the audacity to go away to university and try and have a life away from home in a way. So what happened as I got into my 2nd and 3rd year, when we didn't have to leave our university accommodation, I just stopped going home. I didn't go home very often, and I would go and stay with friends or my then boyfriend or something to avoid going home. So I went home, back to my family home, less and less. And then I started my work in London and I didn't go home much at all. But I would get phone calls, especially from my stepfather, telling me things were going really badly. And I remember once getting a call and from him. I was at work, and he said things like, well, things are going so badly, I think I'm just going to drive my car off a cliff, so I'm just ringing to say goodbye. And I was beside myself. I didn't know what to do. I really didn't know what to do. I went to see my boss and I said, I'm going to have to go. And my boss talked me out of it and said, maybe, the better place for you is to be here, and, and da, da, da. And I can't actually remember what they said, but I didn't go. And it turned out that, it was another dramatic moment, and, nothing did come of it. But those sort of dramatic events happened quite often. My mother would turn up to see me occasionally, usually drunk. There was, before I left home, actually, there was an occasion when we'd left a party, and I could see she'd been drinking all the time, so I was worried about getting in the car, and she was driving on the wrong side of the road. So I had to, luckily the road wasn't very busy, but I had to make a pull back onto the right, the left carriage way, because she was driving on the other side. And I suppose that was my normal. I didn't know any different. But more and more as I got older, I found it very hard to go home. I found it very hard to be a part of what was going on there. I felt like I felt like the odd one out. I was made to feel the odd one out, really. My mum's drinking had definitely worsened, and she wasn't very pleasant when she'd drunk. She'd had a drink, or when she'd had quite a lot to drink, she wasn't pleasant at all. She was vile to me at times. I don't really know why. I think she felt really bitter that I had opportunities that she hadn't been given. I'm not 100% sure. I was the only girl, and I don't know whether she saw me as some sort of competition in a way. I don't know what that was about, so I don't really know how to articulate it. But there was a real undercurrent of raw bitterness, hatred, it felt sometimes, which is really confusing coming from your mother. And she always liked to find a way to turn up every now and again and cause a scene. And so wherever I lived, because I moved around quite a lot, she'd come and see me occasionally, and she'd get really drunk and like want to meet my friends, and then make fun of me in front of them and stuff. And it was really quite hard. And it culminated around, when was it? So I found my dad, and in the end, actually, she helped me find my dad. She made it easy for me when I finally plucked up the courage to ask her, because my dad never got talked about. It was like he never existed. But I did tell her I wanted to find him, so she gave me an address of some friends that she thought knew where he was. That's all she did. She gave me an address, and it worked, and I found him. That was great, and that's a whole other story. I think finding him really helped me, because it made me understand why I felt so out of it in my family, because actually I was much more like him than like her. It sort of was a bit like a missing piece of a puzzle in a way, a bit like a missing piece I didn't even know I was looking for. So I think that gave me a bit of strength, probably. There had been, because it was all at the same time that happened, and then I just started a new relationship very early days of a new relationship, and it was Christmas, and I had a massive falling out with her, because well, I did. I just had a massive falling out with her, and there was something just lit in my, a little idea came into my brain that, my God, this is what it's always going to be like. She's always going to side against you, and it's always going to be your fault. It's never going to be anybody else. It's always going to be you. And do I want to keep putting myself in that position for her to keep knocking me down, for her to keep having a go at me? And it was Christmas Eve, and I just left her house and just said, I'm not doing this anymore. And I went back. I didn't live very far away. I went back to my flat, and I was quite prepared to spend Christmas on my own. But actually, I got invited to spend Christmas with this new guy that I had just met, and had a marvellous time. But that leaving and not wanting to be part of what was going on for her around that Christmas. I mean, she used to hate Christmas, so she was always a cow at Christmas. But that little spark of, actually, I don't really want to do this anymore, was the real start of me pulling away. And I was 30 then. And then the next thing happened, I actually moved. I left living near her again, because I'd gone back to see if I could make things better, make it more of a family sort of thing, and that wasn't working. And then in the end, I decided to leave, and I moved to Bristol. And I had I'd come home from work, and there'd be and I moved in with the guy that I'd just met, and I'd come home and there'd be messages on the answer machine with her slurring down the phone, telling me how awful I was and I'd left, and she was talking about a dog, because I'd rescued a dog, who from a really good friend of mine, her mum had rescued a dog, and they were trying to find it a home, and I wanted to give it a home because I was living close by at the time. And my mum had said she would help me, and then when I left, she ended up with the dog. Bit of a convoluted story, but she would ring and leave messages saying, "Now this bloody dog of yours is here, and what am I going to do with it?" My mum loved that dog, she really did, but she used it as an excuse to ring me up and berate me about it. And in the end, it took a few weeks, and I rang her back and I said, right, this is where this ends. Okay, you decide, do you want to keep that dog? Because if you don't want to keep her, I am going to come and get her, and I will make something work, but I am not putting up with this anymore. And she went, oh, right, okay, I'll keep the dog. So she kept the dog, and to be fair to her, she didn't ring me up and give me hell about it again. And it was interesting, because that really was the start of me pulling away, or it was almost the end. We didn't have a big row, but from that time, which was about 2001 probably, from that time, I just didn't call her anymore, and she didn't call me. So there was never a massive big argument. There was just this, right, are you keeping the dog, or am I keeping the dog? Or am I having the dog back? And that was it. But from then on, there wasn't really much contact, and that's the way it stayed. There was a good, let me think. I'm trying to think of the timing now. There was a few years where I didn't have any contact with her at all. She came to my wedding in 2005 and absolutely disgraced herself. She was awful. I'm sure many children of alcoholics will tell you stories about their parents being at their wedding. I didn't really want her there, but I didn't feel like I could say no. My dad had just died as well. Anyway, so she came to that, and after that, that's when it really, really came to an end, and I had really no contact with her. Through my brothers, my younger brothers, I kind of knew that she was okay. She started talking to my youngest brother more about me, and he just said to her, look, you need to make more of an effort if you want Philippa back in your life. And then all of a sudden she started trying a little bit, and I was like, oh, what's all this about? So she'd ring me and leave me messages, which she'd done occasionally, but I just ignored them because they were usually slurred messages. But she started actually contacting me more and more often. And I thought, oh, what's this about? And then I realised she was getting married again, and she wanted us to go to the wedding. So we did. This was probably 8 or 9 years of not much contact. Went to the wedding. I actually suggested that we had lunch before the wedding so that it wasn't the first time we'd seen each other, and it wasn't the first time I'd met her new husband. And at that lunch, she met my youngest son for the first time, who was then 5. And she'd met my oldest son, who was then 7, once when he was a baby. So we'd had largely no contact at all. And after the wedding, there was no contact again after that. So it was really, the reason she got in contact was so that she could put on a good show with all her children at the wedding. And then there was no contact again, really, not because of any massive falling out, like I say, but just because my life was so much easier. I wasn't on that roller coaster of codependency with her like I had been for a lot of my early years. And it was a lot easier not having her in my life. It wasn't easy. I don't want you to think that it was easy, because it's really hard knowing that your mother, especially when we're fed these stories that, your mother is like, the person who's going to love you the most, and the one person who's always going to be there for you, and all those things. That my mother was out there in the world. I had no idea where she was. I mean, okay, she was out in this country. I had no idea where she was, where she lived, what she was doing, what she was up to, whether she was okay. She equally had no idea about me, other than what we gleaned, through my brothers. But really, she had no idea. And it really pained me that my mum was out there and didn't seem to care whether we were in touch or not. So I'm not saying it was easy, but it was easier than having an alcoholic in active addiction in my life. I just couldn't cope with it anymore. My nervous system could not take it any longer. And I didn't hear much from her at all until I found out that she was really ill and she was in hospital, and I went to see her, and then she died quite soon after that. And I decided that my life was easier without her in it. And that really goes against what we are told as a society, that to revere our parents, that we forgive our parents, everything. Oh, but it's your mum. Yeah, it's my mum. But if anybody else treated me the way she treated me, I would have left her a long time. I wouldn't have had anything to do with her a long time before I actually found the strength to do that. So, I'm telling you this because I once said this on a podcast, and, I was a guest on a podcast. No, it wasn't my podcast, my episode with Josh Connolly. And, he said that, that a lot of people don't break off contact with their parents. And it's really not something that gets spoken about, because it's, it's not really accepted that's it's not acceptable, apparently. So I wanted to record this episode about my experience, because I thought it might be useful and helpful for anybody who's either in that same situation and just sort of wants to know that it's not just them who's found the need to distance themselves, or anybody who's thinking about it and, feels guilty. I mean, you only get one life. Your parent is an adult, and they can make their own choices, their own decisions. I'm not saying that alcoholism is a disease, and they have that disease, and they have to want to get better or to improve things for themselves. Nothing you say or do will make them change. They have to want the change for themselves. And in the meantime, what is happening to your life? Have you put your life on hold? Have you made decisions based around what might be better for them rather than what you actually want or might be better for you? Yeah, are you putting up with loads of abuse or being let down, emotional neglect, emotional abuse? Are you putting up with things that if it was anybody other than your parent, you wouldn't dream of putting up with? If you find yourself in any of those situations and you're wondering how can you carry on, then I just want you to know that not everybody sticks with that situation. And if you're thinking of going your own way, then, it's okay to do that. And other people do, even though we don't really talk about it much. I mean, my view is that we get one beautiful life in this body on this earth. And it's really our job to live the best life that we can. And if that means taking ourselves out of a toxic situation so that we can live the best life that we can, then maybe that's something we really need to consider and do, perhaps. Yeah. So, if you have found this useful or interesting, is there anybody in your life that you think might find it helpful to hear this? Then please do pass it on. I'd love to hear from anybody who's in a similar situation. And, gosh, if you want to talk about it or, send me a message, please do get in touch. I really, would love to hear from you. And yeah, just trying to think if there's anything else I meant to talk about and I forgot. I'll remember the minute I stop recording. But no, I think that's it for now. So until next time, you take lots of good care of yourself, please do. And look out for news about my course starting in January if that is something that you think might be useful for you to start in January 2023. I'd love to have you along if you think that might be something that you're interested in. Okay, take care. Until next time, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Meeting of Minds podcast. You can find this podcast in all the usual places. Please tell your friends, please subscribe, and if you have a moment, I'd be really grateful if you could rate and review, as it helps other people find us and helps me spread the messages of empowerment and positivity that I'm really passionate about. If you want to find out more about me, you can visit my website www.safeandsupported.co.uk. Until next time, bye.